So thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Conservation, Recreation, and Citizen Science, presented by Matt Wallace. My name is Hannah Shepsmeyer. I'm the Conservation Volunteers Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy of Canada, Alberta region. I'd like to start by stating that we at the Nature Conservancy of Canada respectfully acknowledge that the work that we do across the country is on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. The Nature Conservancy of Canada is a national charity and Canada's leading not-for-profit private land conservation organization, working to protect our most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Since 1962, NCC and its partners have helped to protect 14 million hectares of land coast to coast to coast. This evening, we will be joined by Matt Wallace, Citizen Science Coordinator and organizer of the Calgary City Nature Challenge, to learn about all things citizen science and how to participate in the upcoming City Nature Challenge. Now, before we begin the webinar, I have a couple quick housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing a link to the recording after the event. So just keep an eye on your inboxes. You're welcome to revisit the content later and share it with your friends and family. And we will be keeping all participants on mute and turning off participant videos. However, we still invite your comments and questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bar of icons. In the middle is a chat box. You can just click on that chat bubble. If you think of a question at any point for Matt, just type it in there and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. All right, now at this time, I'd like to throw it to our speaker, Matt Wallace. Thanks for joining us today, Matt, whenever you're ready to go.
Okay, thanks very much, Hannah. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank the Nature Conservancy of Canada for hosting this event. So tonight I'll be speaking a little bit about how kind of citizen science or community science can help with conservation, but how at its foreground, it's really about recreation. So I hope you pick up a few skills in this. We'll do a bit of an I Naturalist tutorial and maybe think a little bit more about, where you're sharing your photos, how you might do that, and what it can lead to for conservation and research. So my name is Matt Wallace. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta. And as Hannah said, I'm the City Nature Challenge Calgary event organizer. I work with a few naturalist groups within Calgary. One specifically is the Weaselhead Glenmore Park Preservation Society, and I'm also a director with Nature Calgary. So my background is in geography, and while I was studying both in Calgary and Berlin, I was interested in urban ecology. So what lives in cities besides people, and kind of how do they respond to the built environment? So with that, my interests are heavily involved within kind of urban habitats, particularly birds and plants, how they fit into the whole spectrum, coexistence and conservation, and of course, education and these types of science programs. So if you're already an I Naturalist user, you may have seen me on there, but I also have my Instagram and Twitter. If you ever want to connect with me, please feel free. And I'm really grateful to NCC for allowing me to speak tonight, because this will prepare us for the upcoming City Nature Challenge happening April 30th to May 3rd. So if you've never heard about this event before, it's a global initiative to document urban biodiversity. So in this slide here, I have 325 cities. It's actually over 400 around the world participating, and it's a friendly competition to see which city can make the most observations, document the most species, and engage the most people. So for the Calgary area, that includes Calgary, Cochrane, Airdrie, Chestermere, Okotoks, and Glenbow Ranch Provincial Park. I'd like to thank the sponsors and partner organizations of this year's Calgary event. And we'll kind of jump into I Naturalist and come back to the City Nature Challenge just a little bit at the end. So within our urban ecosystem, it's amazing how much nature we have, considering how much we've altered the environment as a whole. Everything from, kind of the urban carnivores to just a huge diversity of birds and pollinators. They're all interacting not only with kind of the physical form of the urban environment, but also everything that we've introduced into it. So all of the plants that we've brought from around the world, other species that we've introduced, such as birds or other invasive species. And although we live in these areas, we spend the majority of our life in these places, cities, that is, we really don't know that much about kind of the urban ecology of it all. So kind of with that question about, what exists in cities and where is it and why is it here, it led me to fall in love with this app called I Naturalist. And, throughout this presentation, it's mostly focused on I Naturalist, but there's tons of other kind of citizen science applications that you can use and still contribute back information. So, use whatever is comfortable for you and you prefer, but today is mostly about I Naturalist. So if you're brand new to I Naturalist, it's important to recognize that it's at its forefront, it's simply a social network that kind of unites a community of people interested in biodiversity. So that social network, I'll kind of explain how that plays in later on, but just by kind of sharing your information with one another, we're also encouraging people to connect with nature. So the app itself will help to make identifications, helping you learn about the environment, but also it helps you to connect with like-minded people. And out from that, we can develop a lot of scientifically valuable data, which can inform decision-making processes, conservation, and how we connect with nature or coexist with it. So this is a map on the right showing kind of the I Naturalist observations of the world. The platform has grown tremendously in the past couple of years. So right now it's sitting at about 61 million species or observations, and that makes up 327,000 species currently. And almost weekly, there's new species being added to it. And you can see kind of on the far right here, the number of observers. So those are people that are contributing to the platform. It's really not a lot of people that are doing it. And I'll kind of dive into who those people generally are. And kind of to give you an idea about what is I Naturalist, how does it work? This is a basic schematic of kind of how it operates. So on the left, or perhaps the right, depending if I'm mirroring my screen, we have a community of people who are going out and they're documenting nature. So these are, people taking photos or making audio recordings, or sometimes even just notes about biodiversity. So everything from plants, birds, mammals, protozoans, fish, everything in between. So, with kind of the advent of having our phone in our pocket now, it's become even more accessible for people to document things. What they do is they share it to iNaturalist, and there's an AI or artificial intelligence that's built into it, and it will assess kind of the image quality and the variables within that, also the location and the date and time, and it will provide suggestions to the individual who's shared their photos. Now, that's only kind of a basic identification, and that helps to kind of bring it towards the amateurs and experts who really confirm or vet the data. So this is an iNaturalist or an iNaturalist community of people with an interest in biodiversity, and lots of experts out there who kind of confirm what it is that was seen. Once that happens, the data becomes research grade. So that means that it's received a few identifications from the INAC community, all in agreement. And with that, it's shared with national and global biodiversity information centers. And all of that information is openly available for researchers to access. And I've kind of got these like feedback loops going into here. So as the data gets better over time, we can learn more and more from the research grade things. That ties it back into the community, kind of reaffirming that. And it also helps to kind of retrain the AI itself. And then going right back to the beginning, that just helps encourage people to connect with nature and learn more about it. So who are the people that are using iNaturalist? Well, to be honest, the majority of people kind of contributing observations are people who have a real affinity for nature. So we don't need that many people always out documenting things, although it would be nice to see. But there's kind of a group of super users, you could say. And those people are uploading probably, if I had to guess, maybe 50% of the observations that we see on iNaturalist today. But the other 50% are just generalists. So they want to know, what is that plant or what is that butterfly that I saw? Everyone's curious about nature, but they might not know how to engage with it. Or they may not have access to kind of a naturalist community within their own social circles. So, most people are always kind of carrying a camera on them or whatnot, and people are using this as a means to go and explore, be outside, exercise, practice their photography if they're using other cameras or whatnot, and simply to make connections with nature. And from that, that's where a lot of kind of discoveries come from. And some people enthusiastically seek those out. And then there's other kinds of people who are just really interested in participating in BioBlitz events or community science. And they want to share that with the community specifically because they hope to advance research or science within various fields. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but kind of what are the researchers using iNaturalist for? Well, there's a lot of things that can be derived from iNaturalist data, but some of the most popular or topical debates and studies, are things regarding new species or rare species, invasive species, lots to do with biogeography and range expansion, migration, the phenology of quite a diverse amount of topics with phenology. So let's say like the seasonality of flowering plants or insects, those types of things. There's also lots of information out there about public engagement and social sciences, including things on environmental justice or access to nature, social equality or inequality. And then, of course, kind of the other social component, understanding that this is kind of a social network. So how are people engaging with nature and even participating with it through such things as bioblitzes or park and conservation inventories? So these are just a few examples borrowed from inaturalist.ca about some interesting finds that they've had over the past couple of years. iNaturalist is generally pretty young in terms of a global platform. So only around 2015 did it really start to take off around the world. But now it's really got some momentum moving towards it. So kind of this first key achievement, I think, is really interesting, where it says that, according to inaturalist.ca, that 52% of Canadian conservation programs are associating iNaturalist data with the conservation program itself. So they're citing data. It's not specific to iNaturalist, but other kind of citizen science platforms and data, iNaturalist being one. There's millions of observations being made each year. So iNaturalist Canada is growing second to the United States across all of countries in the world. Lots of interesting finds about invasive species, some conservation projects regarding things like monarch butterflies, and so on. So to date within Canada, we have over 4.5 million observations. And I'll just make sure that this window is out of the way. But what you can see is that, looking at this hotspot map, the majority of the observations are coming from urbanized centers. So there are observations kind of in northern Canada, but with fewer people being there. The observation data is definitely biased towards where people live. So this is one really interesting observation that was made last year in, I believe, Ontario, with the discovery of a Zig Zag Sawfly. And, the actual organism even wasn't documented. However, the pattern of this zigzag was identified by somebody on I Naturalist, and it was later confirmed by the authorities saying that this highly invasive insect was now present in Canada. And it was made just by, a generalist user of I Naturalist. This video is a little bit old. I was trying to find the most recent kind of visualization, but what this is I Naturalist data showing the migration of monarch butterflies. So if you recognize that there's a timestamp associated with each photo, also a location, we can actually model migration patterns and the phenology of various things happening like this throughout the world. And kind of going back to the phenology thing, so during the City Nature Challenge, I'm really hoping that we can find lots of these morning cloak butterflies in Alberta. I find it really fascinating how on iNaturalist you can access the data. It's all open source. So there's some cool ways to visualize it within iNaturalist itself. And one of these is kind of the life stages or phenology of the defined by a certain area and to a certain species. So this is kind of the life stages of the morning cloak. We know that these butterflies overwinter as adults, which we can see kind of, let's say, starting at October. It's so cold out, they're not really out and about. And then beginning at March, when it starts to warm up in our spring in Alberta, we can see that there's a huge flux of adults that have emerged. And then they begin to decline. And this second hump here, the orange one, demonstrates the larva of the morning cloak. And then we can see that the larva will become adults again in the second hump before the winter. So just an idea of kind of what you can visualize. And if you think about this on like kind of a big data or global scale, the things that we can actually learn from when, where, and why people are sharing their observations. So one of the groups I mentioned that I work with is the Weaselhead Glenmore Park Preservation Society. And I just wanted to share this project with you to demonstrate how perhaps a local conservation group or any conservation agency could use the data, for example. So to date, within this project that we've set up, it includes observations from all time, but it's only been online for about a year and a half now. So from 265 people visiting the park in Calgary, we have over 5,600 observations, making up over 840 species. And if you look at the pie chart on the left here, you can see that about 65% of those are considered research grade. So what are people looking at? Well, the majority of them are plants, but there's also lots of birds and insects that are also recorded in the park. And to kind of show you what that looks like in terms of the map, well, you can see primarily people are actually exploring the park or sharing their observations from kind of the pathway network, which is really good to see because as a natural area within Calgary, we do encourage people to stay on trails. But, there's data that we can kind of extract from this. So one is that we can see kind of hotspots, not exactly within this map, of where people are really seeing something unique. And in this area over here, we have a lot of cliff swallows, beavers, lots of birds, as well as kind of in South Glenmore Park here, where you have this point that accesses to the center of the reservoir, or the deepest point there, where lots of people are birding and experiencing nature within the city. So that's kind of what a project looks like. And if you are a conservation group joining the presentation tonight, I would encourage you to look at creating a project for your own area and understanding, or beginning to understand, how people are exploring your area and perhaps even what they may be discovering or documenting. In terms of Calgary, we're at about 61,000 observations within the city now, which I'm really excited about, because when I first started using it in 2018, we were only at 5,000 observations. So the majority of these, well, not the majority, but a lot of the observations began with the City Nature Challenge happening in Calgary. And what we found is that people use it for the 4-day period of the competition, and then they continue to use it throughout the season. So with that, we have about 2,300, 2,400 species that have been identified. And within my own research and other projects that I've worked on, what I found is that in terms of impact assessments, or kind of species diversity of our parks, they're definitely underrepresented. And what we're seeing within I Naturalists, or the collected community data, is that the community is actually pushing the amount of information that's available for kind of decision-making processes or land management. So there's a lot more species than we ever thought living in Calgary. And I think we're developing probably one of the most thorough biodiversity assessments that Calgary has ever had. With that said, I would still say that we actually don't really know much about kind of the built environment. So this is the Weaselhead map again, and you can see that there are very few observations happening within kind of urban or built up areas. So lots of people, when they need to go outside and they want to access nature, they're visiting our natural areas, as you can see by all of the observations, but they don't necessarily share information from within our communities. And that's something that I hope the City Nature Challenge can help change our minds about. And what I would say is that, nature is everywhere. It exists within all those gray or built up areas within our cities. A few examples here being these orchids that I found in a roadside median, these badgers that I found directly downtown in Calgary last year, and even some of the first kind of seasonal things we see, where we have competing pollinators with some of our native plants within our natural areas. So I've been posing this question to a few people and groups that I've been working with over the past month about, I'd like you to just think about maybe how many species you've ever encountered in your entire life. And it doesn't have to be on I Naturalist, but just something to kind of ponder. Find it to be an interesting question and just kind of fun. So maybe I'll just check the chat quick before moving on, but the next part will be on using I Naturalist to upload your observations. So for this presentation, I've set it up for discussing the use of inaturalist.ca on a desktop. And I do have a small little segment on using the app on your phone at the end of this. So I'll try and not go too fast with this, but you're welcome to contact me at any time if you have any questions. So the first thing, in Canada, we encourage people to use inaturalist.ca. And what this does, it allows researchers and Canadian data centers to manage the data or access it more immediately than they would from, say, using inaturalist.org. So I'll just show you really quick on how to kind of affiliate your account with that. First thing, go to inaturalist.ca and you can log in or sign up there. And then when you've landed on your dashboard, this will show all of your the content that you've interacted with or things you've shared, identifications coming from other people. You just want to go up to the top right corner and select your profile. And on the left, you can click on account. And at the top right, you'll see that there's a I Naturalist network affiliation. So just choose I Naturalist Canada within that, and you're all good to go. So looking at kind of the I Naturalist Explore tab within the desktop, this is something that any of you can do from home. These are just screenshots taken right off the website. And what's really cool is that, let's say you're a high school student or a university student, you could definitely access this information for your own research projects. So if you go up to the Explore tab here, you can refine the area specifically to wherever you're interested in. This could be anywhere in the world, even using inaturalist.ca. So in this case, I'll show you Calgary. And what this does, iNaturalist uses or it references Google names. So you can see that there's this large box around Calgary, but that's not exactly the municipal boundaries of the city. So under places of interest here, and you have to be on the map tab, it allows you to access community curated places. So this could be, for example, your local park, conservation area, or even a city such as this. So if you click on that, you can see that now we actually have the area for, or the municipality for Calgary. And there's a whole bunch of filters that you can kind of apply to clean up the data as you like. So in this example, we'll look at, say, reptiles. You can also type the species name in. You can type by a person or by a project, anything you'd like to see that. There's also all of these variables or filters that you can look at. So maybe you're not interested in wild organisms. Maybe you want to look at the captive ones, which could include house plants or street trees, those types of things. But so by looking at kind of the reptiles using that filter, we can see all of the observations of reptiles within Calgary. And there's other ways we can view this using the grid or the list. So the grid provides kind of the images with the name below them. And you can see most of these have achieved research grade. You can also go to a list that has kind of more information about when it was seen, the location, and still some information about the photo there. So in terms of iNaturalist observations, what are they? They can really be of anything. iNaturalist is generally geared towards wild organisms. So sometimes people do upload houseplants or garden plants, street trees, or even animals, say in a rehabilitation center or even at the zoo. The idea is to try and map out wild organisms, but that can be everything from, insects or arachnids to mammals, pollinators, amphibians, plants, all of that's included. But you can also upload what's called evidence of life. So this could be something like a cone or a feather, maybe some tracks you saw in the snow. And what that says is, at least this, or at its very minimum, there was an organism in this place during this time, roughly. So you can also upload audio recordings done directly from the app, or you can record them on, say, a mic or your phone and upload them later on. So just kind of going back to the Calgary data quick, or sorry, the desktop app, you can see in the top right that there's an upload button. So let's say you've gone out and you've taken photos with your digital camera. You definitely would like to use the inaturalist.ca uploader. It's way faster and you can do a batch upload, which I'll walk you through here. So now we're in the uploader and you can see that there's a couple of different options we can do here. So you can choose files where you can search directly within your computer. You can go to more import options, which allows you to look at or import observations from, say, Facebook or Flickr, audio recordings from SoundCloud. And probably the easiest thing is for myself when I'm going out and I'm taking a lot of photos, I'll drag these in directly from my SD card. So you just drag and drop them in, and you can see that they've been uploaded. Now, there are ways to geotag your photos in the field with either a GPS or using the app, it will be automatic. But in this case, I haven't geotagged these, so I'll walk you through the process for that. So I always encourage people to upload the location first. And the reason for that is because I Naturalist will use the location in helping you to, or in helping to identify your photo. So let's say I have no idea what this observation is. The first thing I'll do, location. You can either scroll in on the map or you can search for a location at the top. So in this case, I'm going to go to the Weaselhead Flats, and we can see that once again, it's kind of brought me to a Google location, in this case, a parking lot. That's not necessarily where I saw it, so I would encourage you to try and map it in as best you can. And for me, that was kind of right down over on the Erskine Bridge here, right over the Elbow River. So what you can do for moving the pin, you can either click on a location, you can grab the center of the center dot and you can relocate it. And you can see at the bottom here, I've set it at 20-meter accuracy, but you can also use kind of the outer circle to expand that. Let's say you just don't know exactly where you were within this, this specific area. So there's this other part about kind of merging photos. So I have two photos of the same bird here. You can see by the timestamp, they were taken 1 minute apart from one another. But you can upload a maximum of 20 photos per observation. And the reason you might upload that many is because maybe you want to show some of the behavior of something that happened, or perhaps each image is showing you some other details that may help to identify it. So in the photo on the left, we can see that at least there's some face, and we can see a little bit more color, whereas the one on the right, you can see some details, but it's obscured by the branches here. So I would recommend always trying to drag your photos or merging them with the best photo first. So just by dragging it over, you can see that now I've merged those two. And I've gone ahead and I've just added in the locations exactly as I saw, or I showed you with kind of the step one. So on the left, there's some opportunities where you can kind of do, you can either edit that observation directly that time. So that could be the name or the time, date, location. But you can also hold shift or select all of these observations and you can add notes. So let's say you want to upload, say, 3 different observations, but all of the same species. You can enter that name in on the left there. So now that we have our photos geotagged, we're going to click on species name, and we can see this is the AI that I was talking about with I Naturalist providing some suggestions about what it is. So perhaps the photo is not of high enough quality, perhaps it's a bit out of focus, or perhaps the AI just may not be recognizing it. You can see that it's suggesting, well, we're pretty sure it's in this genus, but we're not quite sure. But otherwise, here's our top suggestions. And these are ordered in a way where the one at the top is kind of its best guess, but occasionally these can be a little bit off. So something to keep in mind. So for myself, I know that this is a muskrat. So I'll just select muskrat. I'll do the same for the house finch here. And the last, I want to just talk about this, these flowers here. So these are directly across from the park. Actually, it's somebody's house. And we know that these were planted there. So a captive cultivated organism means that it was intentionally put in place by people. It's kind of there, maybe not against its will, but it was intentionally, relocated to this area. So although these are tulips, they're not like native to the Calgary area. So we marked the captive cultivated to help refine kind of the biogeography of the wild organisms. So by clicking on that, you can see that there's now a little C that pops up here stating that it's now captive. And I've also kind of just put in plants here to show you that you can also use kind of a lower taxonomic degree. So let's say I know that these are tulips, I can type in tulips, or I can just leave it as plants. And what that does, it allows for the I Naturalist community to find the observation by filtering out things such as plants or and those kinds of things. So now we have, excuse me. So now we kind of have this like the core data. We have the what, the when, and the where. That's really all you need to make an observation on iNaturalist. I do encourage people to make notes because the words that you include there, let's say it's like a muskrat in a river or something, all of those words are keywords that can be searched or used to refine the number of observations down to a specific thing. So something like that, maybe you see a dead organism or roadkill, you have say a window strike by a bird. There are people who are looking out for bird species and locations of where birds are striking windows. So I think you guys kind of have like a basic understanding about iNaturalist observations, and I'll just show you really quick what this looks like on a phone. So I'm using the Android version, and it is a little bit different using an Apple phone, but generally it's the same. So on the iPhone, there's either a camera or it's a green plus button like this. And right now I'm in the settings, so I'll just click new observation. And what I would say is that, I don't really mind going out and never opening the app when I'm out like enjoying nature. So what I do is I take lots of photos of things, and then when I get home, I use the choose image option. So what that does, it allows me to select the images directly from my phone or my gallery or camera and import them into iNaturalist where I'm have access to Wi-Fi and I'm not being kind of distracted by it while outside. So if you're wondering how you add like multiple photos like this, all you do is you hold one down and then you can select all of the ones for that specific organism that you're trying to share. And sometimes it is necessary to get multiple angles, for example, with some plants to receive proper identification. So now you can see on the right, my images are all uploaded within the app. You can order these by clicking on these buttons. You want to try and have the best photo first, or the photo that shows the most details. And looks like I don't have a shot for it, but when you click on this "What did you see" button, that's where you can view the iNaturalist suggestions based on the AI. So for myself, I know that this is, even though a plant from last year, it's a Canadian buffalo berry, so I'll add it in there. I'll add some notes. And then you can see that the timestamp and my location have been saved directly from my phone because I have my location services turned on. At the bottom, you'll also see that there's the captive cultivated box, which you can check. And I'll speak a little bit about the location visibility in just a moment. So in terms of like making really good observations, I would say take as many photos as you need to get the details. Try and get your images in focus, get a lot closer than you think. It's difficult to identify a tree from across a field, but if you can show images of leaves or bark, the general shape, perhaps even the habitat, it may encourage people to identify your observation. Using those explore features within iNaturalist, you can go to places where there's less documented or less observations being shared. You can explore in your own backyard, look in your gardens, look in your alleyways, local parks. When you're on a hike or something, you can definitely use iNaturalist. And then there's kind of some other tools that you can use, such as a hand lens, microscope, those types of things. Sometimes it's not always possible to take a photo, so consider using the audio recording, which you can do directly within the app, or you can record it and upload it later. Things like amphibians, we can usually identify which species it is just by the calls. So sometimes those audio recordings are quite valuable. And I would encourage you to leave some notes and comments on your own observations, but also other people's pages. So for the location accuracy, this is kind of a question that we get quite a bit. When you're making your observations, you can determine if you would like to share the location with others. So there's three options. One is open, which means that anybody can view the location publicly, as well as the photos that you've shared. There's another option that is obscured, and that means that people can view your photos, but for each unique, say, iNaturalist viewer looking at your photos, there's a random point generated within a 20 by 20 kilometer grid. So that means that they don't know the exact location, but they can still see that it's kind of within, say Calgary or something like that. There's also a private function, but I don't encourage you to use that because that means that the location information is not shared whatsoever. So it makes it very difficult for people to find your observation to help ID it, but also it doesn't really help to kind of follow this kind of open source and community building of observations. In terms of the, like when you would use the obscured, I would say, if you're at your own house, you find an insect or say a mouse crawling around, perhaps you don't want to share the location of your exact residence. The same could go for your backyard. All of that location information is still available to you, but just not the general public. And researchers can always contact you or request permission from the national data centers if they really deem it necessary to know the location. There are quite a few, I think it's over 1,000 right now, and there will be some modifications, but threatened or endangered species are automatically obscured. But if you have a concern for the well-being of any organism, I would encourage you to obscure your observations. So that kind of brings us back to the upcoming City Nature Challenge. As I said, it begins this Friday. So 12:01 a.m., you can stay up late on Thursday night, leave your porch light on or something and go outside right at 12:01 and look to see if there's any insects that may have gathered on your porch. Do that all the way up until 11:59 on Monday and try and make as many observations as you can over those 4 days. So although I'm kind of promoting the City Nature Challenge Calgary event, there's over 400 cities around the world, including 23 cities in Canada. So look for a diversity of species if you can. Try and upload lots of observations and encourage your friends, colleagues, and family to all join in. This is a map of the global cities participating, and it's really cool to see that I think it's 42 countries they said that cities are participating in this year. So the results will be announced on May 10th after a week of everyone uploading and making identifications. And we'll see which city can make the most observations, engage the most people, and find the most species. So if you want some more information to see if there's a city participating near you, you can go to inaturalist.ca and type in City Nature Challenge 2021, or visit the projects page and you should see a post there where you can just click and join. But you can also view all the cities in Canada participating. Citynaturecechallenge.org has some educator resources They're a little bit more geared to kind of American things, but lots of valuable and fun exercises for kids and families. So locally in Calgary, you can visit my own website, which is citynatureyyc.ca, to learn more about some of the things that we have here in Calgary. So thank you again to Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I look forward to seeing everyone's observations come in Friday through Monday. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer them for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt. That was great. It's amazing to see what biodiversity is in urban settings when you just open your eyes. I can't believe you saw badgers in downtown Calgary. That's amazing. So cool. Just a quick reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, just keep an eye out. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a bar of icons. The middle icon should say chat. You can click on that and put your question in there for Matt. And we did have Emily share that there is a similar type of BioBlitz happening in Edmonton in June. So if you are a part of another organization that does BioBlitzes or citizen science, feel free to share that resource as well. I know a lot of folks here are probably interested in getting out as much as they can beyond this weekend as well. So we did have one question come in from Neil. Would you tag a spruce tree as cultivated if you suspect it was planted there to populate that area?
If you suspect it, yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, so let's say that that spruce tree was planted there, but then some seeds or some cones fell, and there's kind of some self-sustaining trees around it. Those are technically wild or feral. So those are not actually, they don't need to be marked as captive cultivated, but perhaps that original tree.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. And then we had another quick question. So in terms of the City Nature Challenge, when the challenge is over, how will you be able to see the results? How can folks stay tuned to see how their city does?
Okay, so maybe just give me 1 second. I'll open up the project on I Naturalist, and I'll just show you kind of what this looks like quick.
So we are still viewing your PowerPoint screen. So I don't know if we should be looking at an internet browser right now.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just buying some time here.
Perfect. No worries. Yeah, and I think one of the great parts of this webinar is really building that foundation to participate in the City Nature Challenge and beyond. So I think if you are able to also show just how folks, or explain how we can find other projects if we're out making observations throughout the year, how we can join any projects near us, I think that would be really cool as well. I am particularly interested in that.
Okay, so for myself, I'll be sharing all the results on social media for the Calgary area and probably the top 5 Canadian cities. This is taking a little bit longer to load than what I thought, but on I Naturalist, just as I showed you kind of the Weaselhead project, you can also do what are called umbrella projects. And what we can do from that is we can compare all of the cities throughout the world based on the observations we're looking at right now. Hannah, you can see my screen? Okay. So you can look at observations, we can look at the species, and it ranks all the cities based on these, and then the observers. So San Francisco and Los Angeles were the first cities to do it, and they're nearly impossible to beat in terms of engagement. But I think if you can get a few hundred people, like, you're doing a really good job. Also, you know, it's really crazy to look at this map, but just for example, we can view the locations and see kind of the boundaries of where these events were happening in comparison to one another. And we can look at some other kind of stats on the most recent observations. So honeybees being the #1 observed thing, dandelions, mallards. As I said, if you recall, like, generalists are usually the ones who are participating at this time and in these events. And you can definitely see it within the observations itself. And we can also kind of look at like the top observers. So as I said, I challenge you to make as many observations as you can within 4 days. but there is some stiff competition out there with people making almost 5,000 within a single day or within 4 days. So, and there's other stuff where you can kind of look at stats for the quality of the data, the species, all that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Matt. That's really cool. I like that interactive map so that if you don't make the leaderboard, you can still kind of zoom in and out and compare to those folks that are more regional and closer to you in geography. That's awesome. And then if someone were on iNaturalist and got hooked after this presentation or this weekend, how can we use iNaturalist to find other projects within our geographies? Do you have any tips and tricks to join other BioBlitzes?
Yeah, so right on the website, if you go to the community tab, there's a tab called projects. And I guarantee if you type in anything here, you'll find some cool stuff. So there are specific projects looking at, for example, butterflies or BC parks, Great Lakes, you know, all these various things, including things such as, you know, insects found in home. There's a project called Never Home Alone. So it's the things that live with us, all the wild things.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time, I think, over the next few days scrolling through these pages. And we had another question come in. Would it be possible to say, make your yard a mini project, and then you could keep track of everything growing and visiting your yard?
You can do it, but if you're new to iNaturalist, you won't be able to. So to create a project, you need to have at least 100 observations. So this is your weekend to do your BioBlitz. And if you want to make that project later on, you are totally welcome to.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt. I think that is all the questions we have for today. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined us for today's webinar and carving out some of your evening to be with us. And thank you so much, Matt, for teaching us more about citizen science, iNaturalist, and the City Nature Challenge. I know I'm blown away by how much biodiversity is within the city and very inspired to get out this weekend and make as many observations as I can. And I will be following up with everyone with a recording of today's webinar. So Matt had his contact information listed at the beginning of the webinar, but if you do have any questions and you didn't catch that, feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with Matt or answer any questions you have about the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And again, if you are looking for a City Nature Challenge in your area, and it is happening across Canada in quite a few cities, so just head to, I believe it's City Nature Challenge. Oh, Matt posted the link in the chat there. So it's the I Naturalist Projects City Nature Challenge, and you can find the one nearest to you. So yeah, on behalf of everyone at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good luck BioBlitzing this weekend. I can't wait to see what comes out from everyone. And thank you again, Matt, for presenting for us this evening.
Thank you, and good luck, everybody.